Welcome back, everybody, to the Tay Experience. Today, we're going to be talking about history and pop culture. So, first of all, everyone, share your guys' names and your school and, what you guys do.
Um, my name is Levi, and I go to Sanford High School, and I'm an intern here at Radio Marin.
Hi, my name is Santy. I am the media coordinator at the Multicultural Center of Marin.
Cool. I'm Galle. I go to Redwood High School, and I'm also an intern at Tay Radio. So let's just break things off. What do you guys get called as a nickname? I can go first. I am called Galleta. Because Galle with a double L in Spanish is a cookie.
Yay. That's such a good nickname.
Thank you.
I guess, my name is technically, it's Leslie, but people call me Levi. And I just say my name is Levi to everyone since it's easier and it's shorter and I like it.
How do you get Leslie from Levi?
I was trying to look for a kind of a gender neutral name, like anyone. I mean, Leslie is pretty gender neutral, but I wanted something condensed, I guess.
Okay. My family's big on nicknames, so I have many nicknames. But the most common one I'm known at home is Nana. Because my little brother couldn't say my name when he was a toddler, and he said Nana, and he's called me Nana ever since. And so everybody in the family calls me Nana.
Aw, so cute.
Nice nicknames. So let's just move straight into history. So we all took AP US history in high school, right?
Yeah,
I did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So what do you guys think? What part of history is not talked enough about in school or when you were in school, and why does that part of history matter to you guys?
I think something in history that isn't talked about a lot is how much so many indigenous people were exploited, I guess. I know it's talked about, but not in the gruesome details that it should be described at, and because of how horrific some of it was, or most of it, actually all of it was. So I think really going into depth about all the different tribes and in the United States and everywhere else in the world, because I mean a lot of different countries were exploited, going into more depth about it rather than just the surface details, since indigenous people are the people that are native to land.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I feel like even that is, some of the legacies are carried on until today. A lot of the reservations that Native Americans are able to inhabit tend to be the, less fertile, hotter land per se, and also the economy there and the living conditions are a lot worse.
I was gonna touch on that too. That's a really good point, because because of all that exploitation and how much land that Native Americans were reduced to, their living conditions are very harsh at the current moment.
Yeah, exactly.
I think your question was when I was in school. AP US history was the only history that really explained for me Mr. I forgot his name, Mr. Robbins. That was my AP US history teacher name. He really talked a little bit more, I wouldn't say deeply in detailed and in depth about Native American history in the US, but it really showed me how the previous years that I've learned about history, they've kind of made this perfect picture of US history. But the truth is that we are in a land with many opportunities, but there's blood all over it in many ways. And I think that we cannot go back and rewrite history, but we can definitely acknowledge a lot of the good and bad that came from that, so that we don't repeat it. I think the more we kind of brush it off, that's when a lot of things happen again in history. So I'm with you, Levi. The indigenous people here, they've gone through a lot and also, for example, the immigration part of history as well. You know, we can bring in people don't belong here. You go back to your country, or we're Americans. You're not. But if you look at the history, everybody kind of came from everywhere to the U.S. So there's just like, to summarize everything to your question, U.S. history has been painted kind of like a very pretty powerful country, which is in a way true, but at the same time, there's a lot of darkness to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Passing it on to you.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think the part that a lot of people don't look at are the people that used to live on America way before any white people from England even came over in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that nativism itself and the fact that some people think that they're the true Americans is a very interesting like cultural perspective, but like biologically, like like they were not there. So there's like also the facts, which is that while it is like a really interesting part of their culture that they've been inhabiting the land for, a couple hundred years, there's a lot of Native Americans that have been there for like, a couple thousand years, and they've, lived very like sustainably with agriculture and, some pretty like high tech things for the time, and hunting and etc. So, there's also that side of things that like the before America became what we know it as today. That's like the part of American history that we don't really go over it. Like we go over like unit 1, maybe it's like 8% of the exam if we're talking like the percent.
Yeah.
But like that's like, America has like 1,000 years of history before like 1776 or
Definitely.
even like 1607 when Jamestown was founded.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah. So maybe you guys can share a little bit more about your guys' like own cultural background and like how your family has shaped the way you guys see U.S. history. So kind of your guys' own perspective. What do you guys think about that, or what do you guys have to say?
You want to go?
They're very hard questions, but
yeah.
the second half of the podcast will be like
About
a lot more, pop culture, laid back, but we're just getting the more important history out of the way.
I think culturally, like I'm very mixed. I have a bunch of different like backgrounds, like some Hispanic ancestry, Asian ancestry, and it's always weird when I like when I go to Mexico, for example. I know that a lot of my cousins don't actually like to talk to me because I'm mixed and stuff. So it's kind of like this weird feeling of like being left out because because I have so much different like blood running through my veins. But at the same time, it makes me like proud that like I can call myself an American and live in the United States while being so culturally diverse, because diversity is a really important thing to a country. I think to like will make a country bigger in so many different aspects. And I think that the way that what's it called? I don't know, I feel like throughout the years, the more like of mixing that there is in the United States, the more diverse it is, the more pretty it is, I think. But it's just all about like learning to like love yourself and other things around you, especially through history and your own history.
It's a great question, Galle. Thank you for sharing, Levi. I think that has a big thing to do with how when you have a mixture of cultures, it can definitely shift your perspective on how you see the U.S. I come from an indigenous background, so as many know my first language isn't Spanish. Actually, it's a native language from a Mayan, one of the Mayan languages. There's many Mayan languages, and we're a part of it. I don't know exactly the history of my family, but I do have very Spanish last names. My last name is Hernandez, and and it's a very known Spanish last name. So somewhere along there was a mix of of race, right? And so for me, I think how has it shifted my perspective on the U.S.? Well, when I was younger, and people would say you don't belong here or blah blah blah. When I look at history and I say, well, I'm indigenous, technically, all this land in the Americas, maybe not specifically in the U.S., but all the lands my ancestors were probably here way before my other ancestors came into play, right?
Yeah.
So it makes me think a little bit more about the Native Americans. I understood their background very differently, but since I'm indigenous, Native Americans are indigenous communities as well. It makes me reflect more and have a different understanding of how, colonizers came and took away a lot of their culture, their ways of being. For example, I am indigenous, but I have a lot of there's a divide into my family that some of my family don't necessarily carry on the traditions of indigenous communities. Than the other half. The other half is more modernized and stuff. So I kind of lived through that in a little bit. So it makes me reflect on a lot of the communities here in the U.S. specifically that have gone through very harsh conditions.
Yeah.
And we can talk a little bit about it. Is, for example, Native Americans, they had the boarding schools so that the children can be more like the Europeans than indigenous, and what were in the boarding schools were the cutting of hair, right? A lot of Native Americans traditionally had longer hair. Those were purposely, cut. And the land, Galle, you're very right about that. If you go and visit the reserves, they're very deserty, dry, hard places to plant. And it's interesting. I've gotten the opportunity to spend a week in a reservoir where we got to live with a family, and just the living conditions were very, very different. So, yeah, being indigenous makes me look at things very, very differently. It makes me want to honor more where I'm from and honor the Native Americans that are here. For example, in the land that we are, it's the Miwok tribe. But all across America, you will find very different areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So going into my background culturally, I think that I'm more of like a recent European immigrant. So my dad came here from Israel, I guess when he was around 20, just for school. And I guess he stayed there and he met my mom, who lived in America, but her mom came from Israel as well. So kind of recent. And I guess the way it's shaped my view on U.S. history is that because there's such recent immigrants, we learned a lot about how recent immigrants from Eastern Europe and Ireland would sort of handle those really low income factory jobs, and they were discriminated against. So in the same way, because we're Jewish and we have kind of a minority religion, sometimes we see the exact same sorts of discrimination of not being the real American. So for example, there were a lot of migrants back then. I'm just trying to compare the two, that they were Catholic, and Catholics were actually very hated by the Protestants, who were the Americans, right? The majority. And so there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of anti-religious sentiment against those people. And I guess just my family being this new culture, even though we are white, like a lot of Americans, in America, there's still some, anti-Semitism, especially today. And so I guess the way I see U.S. history differently is that I sort of have a bigger heart towards, immigrants in general. I see people from Europe, and I see them with, more open eyes, and I kind of understand that the work they did, was, hard work, and they didn't just go there to use the resources or live an easier life. I feel like they actually contributed a lot more than the people that have been living there for a long time and have this really high status in society. And, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. You brought up a very, very good point of immigration. Being an immigrant myself and my background, we talked about how does that really shape how we see the U.S. I really have learned that the U.S. was built on immigration, and you can argue it as how much you want, but America is built by many different cultures, and that's what makes America. So I think being an immigrant myself, that really plays a big role in why I'm an advocate for immigration. At the same time, I understand why certain immigration policies are the way they are. Now, just because I understand it doesn't mean necessarily that I agree with it. But again, it goes back all the way to history, right? Anyone else?
Well, yeah, I think that's what I was also touching base on, like with the last question about like intermixing and stuff. I think it makes like a country always more diverse. And that's what's nice about it. And also, like about your point about Eastern Europeans, like I think that, yeah, like a lot of people put credits to like a lot of the British and stuff, but a lot of other minority groups in Europe were also a contributing factor to a lot of different, like culturally diverse things in the United States. Like I know, and I watched the new movie Sinners, and it was like a lot about the like it was like the early 1900s, but I know that it's the like what's it called? I don't know if it's antagonist or protagonist, but like the people that were bad, like the villains, they're from Ireland, or like the spirits were from Irish, and I was like, that makes sense, because like a lot of them, they were like one of the first like immigrants to come here, and like a lot, like in the majority to come here, and like I guess that made sense. I was like, that's pretty like a nice touch to the movie, but yeah.
And I think that also immigrants really shaped America. And that's a lot of what we learn actually, is that the Africans brought during the transatlantic slave trade helped bolster the economy by producing crops and farming cotton. And beyond that, even, or I guess later on, the immigrants from, poor European countries that came over worked the low-paying factory jobs. And without those factory jobs, there wouldn't be as much like industrial development, and we wouldn't have these huge skylines in cities nowadays. So I think the cultural background of being an immigrant, you should, if you're one of those, if you like have one of those backgrounds, you should see immigrants as the backbone of U.S. history, or the backbone of the U.S. as we know it today, because like without that cultural diversity, we wouldn't have as strong or as big of an America. Like immigrants actually, I don't know where the stat is, but I've heard many times that immigrants produce more economically than the average American that didn't immigrate. And I don't know, you guys can fact check me, but I've definitely heard that was the stat.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And, I don't know the specifics, but that's actually a fact that immigrants nowadays and in the past have done more for the economy than the average person per se. So I feel like just cultural diversity actually brings in more to America economically, right? The counter to this are the people that say, oh, immigrants are bad for the country economically, but actually there are things proving them wrong. They benefit the economy. So there's that. And yeah, as you said, the diversity of the culture, that's like the social aspect that, American pop culture is like one of the most amazing cultures in the whole world, right? Like when you think of like culture, you think of America and Hollywood and like the trends there. So, maybe America wouldn't lead as much in fashion and culture and design if they didn't have so much like cultural diversity.
Yeah.
Because different cultures bring in their different, trends or different ideas. Yeah. And I don't know if you guys have examples, but I can't really think of any on my mind. Yeah.
I don't think I have one at the moment.
I'm thinking. I don't know. I'm thinking about
Trying
like
to think.
big name.
Yeah.
Like I know Gucci's Italian, and like
Gucci's
they brought a
Italian.
lot of like Italian like different designs to their brand, and it's like a lot. A lot of stores are in the United States, and it's become very popular. It's become like a luxury brand in the United States and a lot of other countries because of how vast their things are and have become over time.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of Americans like those like French goods and Italian goods
Yeah,
and
because
like,
it's like seen as luxury, even though it's from another culture,
yeah.
which is what you making your argument like, or not argument, but your aspect
Yeah.
like correct. Yeah.
Okay. I guess we'll move on to Indigenous and Native American communities. I think we talked a lot about that, but I want to maybe touch on how you guys see that they were treated in the past and how you think that legacy carries on to today. So, as Santi mentioned, the Native American reservations have, or as she agreed with me, that they have a lot of economic disadvantages. I think I recall that Indigenous and Native American communities were sort of pushed out into these like small lands. I remember the Dawes Severalty Act, which actually broke up these huge reservations into these like small sections and forced Native Americans, instead of being in like a communal tribe, to be in individual families, like the
Yeah.
nuclear white families. And so like I guess that was just part of their broader plan of Americanization, or whatever you want to call it.
Assimilation.
Yeah, assimilation.
Um.
And I guess, how do you guys think that carries on to today?
I know in my family, like in Mexico, we're like it's like we're my family from Mexico is a lot more indigenous than say other parts, since we're from like the smallest state in Mexico,
Which one?
Tlaxcala. It's called Tlaxcala, and not a lot of people know about it because it's super tiny. But
I've never heard about it.
you have?
I haven't.
Oh,
Where is it?
it's kind of like right next to Mexico City. It's like 2 hours away, and I know that, like, for example, my great grandma, she didn't really know a lot of Spanish, but could only really speak, or she decided to only really speak a native language in Mexico, which was, wait, I literally it was like a indigenous language, and like, but that was like my great grandma, and then like the more like modernization of Mexico like brought in more Spanish, but like a lot of my family like was a lot tanner than me, for example, because I don't know why, but like obviously because like they're indigenous too, but like stuff like that shaped a lot of my family, because like they were seen as kind of like, they were kind of discriminated against because they were darker, they had like longer black hair and stuff. And I think because of that, so much of my family has been like really like discriminated against, and like I know that because they're indigenous, a lot of them like decided to, or like I have heard from a lot of my family members that they just decided to convert to society standards, just learn Spanish and give up on like traditions. And like I'm trying to learn like some of the native language to want to know more about my culture and stuff, but it's sad to see that sometimes discrimination can get the best of people.
Yeah.
And in this case, it'd be my family.
And where do you see like the values in tradition and like indigenous culture?
I think it's valuable to know like your own history, because especially in indigenous cultures, because I mean it's something so rich and something so real and raw. It's like I don't want to be like all about that, but I mean obviously like being indigenous is something so beautiful, because you're really like you know that you're a part of something bigger, you're more connected to the land and stuff, and I feel like knowing more about my heritage when it comes to that is important for my like genuine like discretion, I guess.
Great question, Galle.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Again, it Native American history here in the U.S. is so dark. It has a lot of blood on America's history. We talked a little bit about the land, and also the separation of tribes and family. Oh, I mentioned the boarding school. That one's a really, if you really do your research and dive into history, it's very awful what a lot of Native American kids had to go through, right? So they were, for those who don't know, Native American children were put into boarding schools that were run by mainly white folks that were trying to make Native American kids look more like the modern society that they had. So taking away their clothes, teaching them how to write, read in more sophisticated ways, haircuts, many ways. And what they did that is they would take away children from families and separate them. Actually, a lot of those children did not go back to their families. Some of them were given to adoption. And it's a really dark history for Native Americans. And throughout history, that has been kind of, I don't know now with you guys in school, but that was always, it was always different. Like there was a different light to it until APUS history. I really understood a little bit more about it. And then for the past few years, we've seen a lot. For example, Canada, I think, found a graveyard of many bodies of Native Americans and children. There have been schools that were boarding schools that in the backyard had Native American children buried of the ages of like babies to older ones. That is really harsh. It's really hard to hear, right? And then let's see, their land was taken. A lot of their culture being of Native Americans were stolen. I say stolen because they weren't allowed to, or they were put that they were doing different things. I'm Indigenous, so there's a lot of things that Indigenous communities, depending on which tribe and which community you're part of, have traditional medicine, traditional beliefs, and that has, because of saying my culture is way better than yours, a lot of those healings and traditions have died and disappeared. And now not second generation, but the generations that are current now for Native Americans, a lot of them have lost their identity in a way because of that, whether it's their great grandparents or grandparents that went through that. So it's really interesting. Yeah. So if someone really goes and learns more about Native American history, it's very bloody, dark, but at the same time, when it comes to history, we can't really change. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we can't change it. The only thing we could do is learn about it, acknowledge it, and learn from it. How can we not do that back again? And especially living in America, our mixtures are all combined. There's no one specific culture that says that's American history, in my perspective, based on how I grew up. Because when I'm here in America, I can learn. There's Salvadorians, there's Mexicans, there's I blank every time.
Me,
yes.
Religiously, I'm Jewish, Israeli.
Yes. Israeli. There's a lot of people from Europe in general. Yeah, right. There's just so many people coming from different places that we have to remember that there was a point where we were. U.S. history was just saying your culture is bad and we have to do this and this and this and this, but now, with our current demographic here in the U.S., we can't really do that anymore. We just gotta say, hey, we're mixed all together. Yeah. The more I talk about it with you guys and during classes in U.S. history, the more I'm trying to understand the incentive behind why America wanted to
abolish these Native American identities, because I feel like militarily they had superior weapons, like superior arms, and they basically took over their land. So what was it that made them decide that they would now culturally try to just get rid of them? Were they like some sort of a threat to America? Would they like take their land back over if they really understood it was theirs? Because I don't know. I'm just really mixed about why they decided to do it in the first place. They had the power to just let them keep their identity and still take over their land with no resistance, or with resistance that would be squashed. So
It's a good
you know,
question. Well, I'm assuming, and this is assumption. I have not done my research
yeah,
exactly on it. I think religion played a big role on that. A Native American communities had very different cultures, and looking at it from my background as well, our indigenous traditions, they don't align very well with. I'm a Christian, so my indigenous side does not align very well with my Christian side. And so, to bring up that, to answer a little bit of your question, I think religion had a big play in it,
hmm
where it was, what you're doing is bad, what I'm doing is good. I'm sent here to make sure you do good, but it wasn't necessarily done in the most proper way. And I think communication was big. A lot of the language, I don't think they communicated very well. And then just imagine you. You show up to a place that isn't yours and you say, this is mine. When Native Americans had the land, they had different communities, but they didn't have borders. They didn't necessarily, I'm assuming they didn't have borders.
yeah,
We later on came up with, you need a passport in order for you to cross
this line,
yeah.
yeah,
Right. I don't think they necessarily had that. So
hmm
if I look at it that way, I think religion had a huge thing to do with it. Language barriers, and just saying, you're taking my, or, this is our home, what are you talking about? Native Americans, I think, did fight back. I don't think they did. I don't think they did. They actually did. They did fight back.
yeah,
And so there was definitely that portion of it. For example, bringing it up, Thanksgiving. When you come to the U.S., Thanksgiving is traditionally known like, oh my God, this is the things where the Native American and they sat together and had a feast to celebrate. Doing this type of work, we've gotten the opportunity to talk to different communities, and we've learned that for the Native American communities here, they actually don't necessarily celebrate Thanksgiving, but they honor their ancestors during that day.
hmm
So I find it really interesting, because for them, there's a lot of their people that were murdered, and so they take that day to honor it.
Yeah, I know. I do that out of respect. I don't celebrate Thanksgiving
hmm
because I think it's wrong. It's a genocide of people. It's not a holiday.
hmm
And like, I know what you were saying about the your question about why they decided to come here. I think it was because of God, gold, and glory. Like I just think it was like greed. People just wanted to come here because they had nothing else to do. They just wanted more and more. And like what a lot of people say is like, once like all the rivers dry up, once there's nothing more left, then that's when like people will realize that you can't eat your own money, you
yeah,
know? And it's like, that's why I think I'm also such a huge advocate for climate justice, because it's like, and like so many other like indigenous communities, like all of this genocide and so much going on, because it's like, because of the fault of greed and so much other things going on. It's like, there's so many disparities in the world. But yeah.
yeah. And just thinking back to the Christian perspective back then, I feel like I know that they were a lot more religious, and a lot more people were religious.
Yeah.
And so that combination, probably knowing that, they probably had a lot more of a justification from God to
Definitely.
just go over there and,
Doesn't that manifest destiny?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That term,
Yeah.
they,
For the
felt
law.
like they had a reason to. Someone
Yeah.
told them they could do it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just them being mean. It was them doing what they were told
Yeah.
in their minds, I guess.
And a lot of people, like, I think in indigenous communities would bring like different like gods into play with that. Like I know like the Virgin Mary was like kind of through like it was a indirect way of bringing in another deity from an indigenous religion that I've heard from. That's what I heard from my family,
Mhm.
and she was like kind of brought into like Catholicism. And, like I think that's nice, but that kind of touches base on what you were saying. Like it's all like it was a lot about religion and
Mhm.
how much more you can get.
Yeah. Religion can shape us a lot, but also I believe that pop culture can shape us a lot. So we're going to move on a little bit abruptly and talk about what you guys think about, shows, movies, or artists that you guys feel represent you or totally don't. Just kind of a shift in gears. What do you guys like, at least, or what do you guys not like about movies nowadays?
This question is interesting because we live in the US. There's mixture of every culture, and which brings the opportunity to create a lot of art and different entertainment targeted to certain areas, or being inspired by certain communities. But the cultural appropriation part is key, and it's a very thin line. I would think about it that way, because what inspires you might touch into the cross the line of being racist. What would be another thing? Inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a very thin line. So it's a great question. For me, typically, for example, I'll take Disney. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but when they've done their previous films back in the day, there's a typical Native American, and, they're considered the Indians, or that's how I grew up, and that's how I understood like Native Americans. I didn't call them Native Americans, I called them Indians, because that's what I understood from a lot of films, not just Disney in general. They were like the Indians, and there's this typical
Dress.
Style that they are. And so funny story, when I traveled to New Mexico to go be with a Native American community, I don't know why that was in my head until I met the community, and they were regular people. They were regular people with just different styles of eating, different styles of certain things that they do, and yes, of course, they had their traditional dance outfits that they would wear, and they explain the history. So for me, I think that can film, books, media can definitely put a perception of a certain community in your head. For example, Latinos in films typically are gang members, farm workers,
labor workers.
Yeah, they're typically that they're kind of in categories. And then you, as a person who doesn't know much of that community, might just automatically have that one. So when you meet someone, that is what you have in your head. So that can pop culture can do that a lot, but it can also have the opportunity to educate in many, many ways. There are a lot of documentaries, books that bring a light to immigration, culture, and all of that, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. I feel like, adding on to your point, pop culture is a lot about how people think the majority are. So that's where we get stereotypes like, oh, well, Latinos are, doing this, dressing like this, being affiliated with these groups. And that's what people think the majority are or do. But there's also, the problem with that inherently, which is that the minority, or what people think are the minority, even if it's not the minority, even if that's like 99% of people actually in that group don't do those things, those people are kind of left out. And so even if it makes a more like entertaining Hollywood show to have more stereotypes, there are I guess, some ways that it can offend some people if they don't relate or they see that as like kind of, condescending to their culture or, etc. A lot of
Yeah.
Jews in movies or shows are seen as the bankers and as the people in positions of high power. Also, if you're a Jew in a show, a lot of the times you're put as this ultra orthodox, very specific attire or dress. But there's also the other types of Jews. There's the Orthodox. There's also the conservative and the other one, I should know, that aren't represented by those stereotypes in those shows. So for me personally, as a Jew, I feel like there's a lot of shows that misinterpret who we are, because there's like a whole modern branch of our religion that is a lot more reform, that was the word.
Oh.
A lot more, a lot more less religious, a lot more with society and not in our own groups wearing suits, wearing the hats or whatever they have them wear.
Yeah, I could see that too a lot with gender as well and pop culture. I think pop culture has taken so many different like ways of like I'm gonna talk about women and the pop culture is like really depicts women in such weird ways, like even child actors. It's weird. Hollywood is very weird. I think sometimes they can take a child and make them like overly sexualized even, or just any kind of woman. I know like Marilyn Monroe, for an example, she was like in the 1920s and like Hollywood did everything to like strip her of like her just her personality and just make her a symbol of something rather than just like taking her she was a very funny woman. Like I've seen some of her interviews. Like she's very funny. She's very nice. And I feel like sometimes, yeah, pop culture can really make something seem like that's their entire personality. That's their entire subject of living when really it's not.
Can I add an example about the media and history? Coco, because a lot of people have seen Coco. It explains a little bit about the history of Day of the Dead. That film brought a light and shared a lot of why Day of the Dead in a way is how it's celebrated, right? That would say it's a good way for people to know and be aware of it. However, what Disney tried to do after is the tricky part. They wanted to I'm blanking on the word. It's not monetized. Is it monetized? No.
Profit.
They wanted to basically own Day of the Dead. That's where it's not appropriate. You can't own something that is culturally right of a community. So when we talk about how can media tell history and stories, I would because I'm in the film industry and I like to watch films, et cetera, that would be a great example. A lot of documentaries share stories about history. And again, it could be a great opportunity for others that I'm not a Jew, but if I watch a documentary that explained, the journey of Jewish communities coming here, it's a great way for me to learn, and it's a great opportunity for the community themselves to share that, because in books there are a lot of authors who share their stories about their journeys. We've had an author on Tay Radio explain their story about their journey from I think El Salvador to here, and it was great to read that perspective and not just some historic person telling you this is how they experience it, right? Yeah.
Individual stories.
Yeah.
I guess we've talked a lot about like the longer movies or shows. Do you guys think that there are any trends on TikTok or YouTube or even Instagram that can be harmful, even if they're, very popular and everyone says them?
Yeah. Do you have any?
Oh, I haven't been on TikTok or Instagram a lot, the shorts, but what do you guys think?
I think
This
Instagram
is hard.
comments are really like weird. Like,
The comment section?
yeah, like I'll be like watching a random video of like someone like doing a backflip, and the comments will be like, "Oh, this sucks." Like they should like it's like the most harmful
Yeah.
like comments I've ever seen. And like I've like had to like stop being friends with some people because of the things they send me on Instagram. Like it's bad. Like I know I had to stop being friends with someone because they sent me something so insensitive about Jewish people. I was like, what? And it was like a picture of
Really?
yeah, it was a picture of Pikachu, and it was like Pikachu, and I was like,
Wow.
what? I was like, what? And then all the comments were like, this is like the funniest thing I've ever seen. I was like, what are you talking about? And
Yeah.
it's like the most harmful stereotypes ever. No, actually, the videos aren't that bad themselves, but then the comment sections and these people, and then it's all like, it's all being supported. No one's being like this is wrong for you to say because people just don't care anymore. And it's like I don't know. Yeah.
Social media is my love and hate relationship with social media, because it can be a very powerful tool, but it can also do so much harm. And by harm, we, like I said, we forget that this country was built on immigrants. No matter how you want to look at it, immigrants built the U.S., whether it's building, construction, painting, and
Farming.
you know, a lot of the even back in the day, a lot of
The
railroads were built by very different communities. So the whole US is built on that. And so social media comes into play, and people who think that they own the land themselves and only have been here forever. And they say very harmful things to different communities. So for example, like you don't belong here, or disrespect certain communities.
Like through social media?
Through social media,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Name I'm thinking of when you say that is, for example, Charlie Kirk. He's
Oh my god, yeah.
I don't know. who it is.
He's the famous guy that goes to like
Different colleges, even
Yeah.
though he doesn't believe in colleges. But
Mhm.
yeah, and he just brings on his very I guess radical viewpoints, very anti, I guess, immigration, kind of hardcore Republican kind of guy. So he's very popular, like especially over the past few years, and he's kind of embodying that hate speech, or whatever
Yeah.
you want to call it.
yeah.
And he has conversations, and I like that he does that, and he has a drive to try to incorporate all perspectives, because he's in a debate. But sometimes he says things that are very offensive,
Yeah.
and when there's a person sitting in that chair with like 1,000 people wearing MAGA hats like screaming at them, then it's hard for both sides to be heard.
Definitely.
And this guy's like a professional. He's been doing it for like 10 years, and he knows what he's talking about. And there's this other person that's like volunteering to have a discussion, and that person doesn't really he's not prepared. He's like they don't know how it's going to go or what he's going to say, and he talks really fast, and he does everything he can. Yeah, interrupts you a lot, and sometimes just avoids what you're saying when what you're saying actually disproves him.
Yeah.
So he seems like a guy that wants to have these open discussions, but when you actually look beyond those like 30-second Instagram clips, a lot of the debates he has at college campuses are very
What's his name?
harmful.
Charlie Kirk. Krk.
Yeah.
But also, like, another thing about him, I remember watching that he was like talking about pro-life and like that
Yeah.
stuff, and like he was literally
Abortion and
arguing
stuff.
with someone that was in the medical field at a renowned university, and he was still disagreeing with them.
hmm
So it's like, I guess people are allowed to have their opinions or whatever, but I mean, he just does not like to be proven incorrect.
I just don't like the environments he has them in. Like,
Definitely, a debate should be like what we're doing, maybe.
yeah, like a table like this with no one
Yeah.
voicing their opinion or cheering Charlie on, or and it's a lot more of a
Calm
studio
environment.
calm
Yeah.
environment. Yeah, that's it.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Well,
We kind of interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, you were
No,
going on
you're
a
good.
point. And then
Well, I was just mentioning that if you don't do your research very well and learn about history, you could be easily influenced. And like I said, and I've been very open about it, the immigration, everything that's been going on. I brings always the question, okay, why does that person believe that? Let's look at history. What's going on? Let's look at the numbers. Let's look at this. And you'll have a better understanding, and you can understand why that person is saying that, not necessarily to agree with them 100%, but you can have a better sense of why a certain politician is saying something, and if the history matches what they're saying, right?
Definitely.
Immigration back in the day versus immigration now looks very, very different. If we look at no, I'm not gonna say it because it's very interesting. Just I would say really suggest everyone to look at the history of how immigration was back then, how immigration is today. That way, when you're on social media and you hear so many blah 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 blah, you can understand it a little bit more, and not be easily influenced to go. If we talk about political. All the political things that have a lot to do with big historic things, right? So if you look at the history, it's a lot harder for other people to, just because you saw a post or someone said something, for you to switch left or right. You can make that choice on your own based on all the facts that are presented and the current situation right now. Anyway,
I think I agree with you on that. I know that a lot of uneducated people have a lot of maybe. Okay, I'm gonna say it. Look, a lot of uneducated people are Trump supporters, and literally, this is like something that is like, it's like known because there was like this speech literally Trump gave where he was like, "Oh, I love the uneducated," and I was like, "Oh." I think a lot of uneducation and a lot of people like not knowing what exactly they're voting for example, can definitely cause change, and maybe not good change. It really depends.
And a lot of people without education get their education from like Instagram University or TikTok University, and that's their only form of or one of their main forms of knowledge of the outside world, or of other things that, and these algorithms are so precise that they can just with like a little switch, like completely change your opinion over hours and hours of scrolling. And that's how they work. That's how these companies really make money, is having a perfect algorithm that can alter every preference to show what they want to show, and etc. So just don't get your education from those social media sites.
Definitely.
Get it from school or
textbook
or online textbook reading.
Read and listen to the people's stories, the people who actually went through that time of a moment of history, because they have more realness of what they lived through than those who are documenting it just on the surface level. That would be my biggest suggestion before anything, because it doesn't matter what political ground you're on. If you don't understand the history and you don't understand the outcomes of all of that and the current situation, then it's hard for you to make a decision on political decisions that are being made. So I would really suggest for all of us to read and learn more about history.
Moving on to our next question. What do you guys think about the way mental health is portrayed in TV or music today? How is that affecting our mental health? Especially the, how is it affecting the youth who, have experienced a mental health crisis in recent years, as we've heard about, with like rising rates of anxiety and depression and all that. Do you guys think, TV or music has any role in that, or do they, embody some aspect of mental health? Anything?
Sorry, I think in some ways, like mental health is portrayed in like Oh, like people take it seriously sometimes and sometimes they don't. Like I feel like if someone reaches out on social media about their mental health struggles, maybe it'll be taken as a joke. And like I know I've had experiences with mental health issues before, and like it's all about like wanting to have a more positive environment where you can grow. And I feel like in social media it's really hard for people to find somewhere positive to want to better themselves, which can lead to more mental health effects later on if you don't get like treatment for it or like have a safe space to talk about what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health for me in the past looks very different from today because of how films and TV shows have portrayed it. Mental health made it seem that it was when someone actually had a mental like diagnosed illness. What I mean by that, like drastically, meaning like
Severe depression,
like
something?
Alzheimer's.
Oh.
What's the other one? Schizophrenic, like those. Typically that's what I understood of mental health based on a lot of the films we watched. It's more of like something's physically like wrong with your mind. Mental health now looks a little bit more different, that there includes that stress, depression, what else, your environment affects the health of your mind, right? So the way I view it now
Sleep.
Yes, there's just so many things. So the definition for me, at least how I've seen it, mental health has changed a lot based on like the movies and stuff. Now, if we look at a lot of films, they focus a lot on mental health as well, but in a different take and saying more about mental health. I need peace. I need a safe environment and all of that. But it's definitely changed over the years. Film and movies have shifted a lot on what mental health is, and I think I'll be honest, I don't think it was very talked about. If you had depression, if you had stress, it was just kind of like a move on in a lot of films. Nowadays, it's a big thing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people like can see it as like just one way that you can like talk about mental health. Like a lot of people are just like, oh, like having self-care with mental health is just, it looks like one thing, but it can actually be various things. Like every single person has their own way of like treating themselves and like bettering themselves, and it all depends. But I don't think a lot of media depicts like self care and having time for yourself and through because of mental health issues just being something like that anyone can do. Sometimes it's just like it kind of looks like just one thing in a lot of media.
Okay. We're just about gonna wrap things up. I have one last question for you guys, which is if you could pass one message about history to the next generation, what would it be?
For me, it would be educate yourself on every topic, not every topic, but like try every topic of the history, or at least the most immediate ones, and to just try not to repeat history, like the bad parts of history, especially like what we were talking about earlier, genocides.
There's so much
Going on, and a lot of it can repeat. So educate, and don't forget, because forgetting is something that shouldn't be done in history.
I would say similar. Education is key. Educate yourself, and just remember that when you look back at history, it's sad, it's dark, but don't stay in that sadness and darkness. Learn from it, and acknowledge it. Acknowledge what was done. Learn from it, and look at your life and say, we're privileged to have a lot of the rights that we have, women's rights, immigration rights in many ways. It's not perfect, but many people before us have paid the price for that. And we forget that specific part. So learn history, acknowledge it, and learn from it. But again, don't stay in that sadness and darkness, because we are the next. We're writing the history now. Our generation, the generations that are currently living, are writing that history. So that's important to remember. And yeah, I hope you guys learned something. And if we said something that was incorrect, know that we didn't do it intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are the writers, and we only live to like around 100. So we should, instead of sitting passively, try to do as much as we can in our generation and avoid our mistakes.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for tuning in to our episode on real talk of history and pop culture.